Late at 1971, Pink Floyd, still reeling from Syd Barrett's departure, gather in secret meetings, determined to capture the pressures of time, greed and madness in a single ERA-defining statement. The world knows the legend built at Abbey Road, but the real story, the fights, failed takes, and wild experiments that forged Dark Side of the Moon, remains tangled in myth and rivalry. How did these frictions and firebrands turn chaos into an immortal masterpiece? Roger Waters sat at his kitchen table in Islington, sketching out lines that would anchor an entire ERA of music. The pressures of modern life, time slipping away, the lure of money, the fear of losing one's mind filled his notes. These weren't abstract ideas. They were the daily realities he saw in himself, his bandmates, and the world outside. The band had just come through the chaos left by Syd Barrett's departure, and that absence lingered. For Waters, it sharpened the need to make sense of what it meant to survive, to grow older, and to stay sane in a world that seemed to spin faster every year. By late November 1971, Pink Floyd was gathering in rehearsal rooms, not just to jam, but to grapple with these questions. Waters pushed for a record that would tie together the anxieties of the age, mortality, greed, mental strain, into a single unbroken statement. His early lyric sheets, though now lost to time, drove the group's direction. In interviews, Waters described the tight timeline, less than 2 months to turn rough ideas into a suite ready for the stage. Nick Mason later called it a rare burst of discipline for the band, a contrast to the aimless experimentation of earlier years. The suite was still untitled, but the drive for unity was unmistakable. The band's creative center was shifting. Waters' voice, sometimes gentle, sometimes insistent, began to shape not just the words, but the very purpose of the music. The story was no longer about escaping reality. It was about confronting it, head on, together. Throughout 1972, Pink Floyd turned concert halls into their own laboratory. Each night, the band unveiled the evolving suite, sometimes called Eclipse, sometimes just an untitled experiment, testing new sections, dropping others, and listening for the crowd's reaction. Bootleg recordings from the Rainbow Theatre capture early versions that sound raw and restless, with arrangements shifting from show to show. David Gilmore's guitar lines, already melodic but less polished than on the final album, twisted and stretched in real time, searching for the right emotional punch. Richard Wright's keyboard harmonies added a sense of space and melancholy, weaving through Gilmore's leads and anchoring the music when it threatened to drift away. The setlist itself was a work in progress. Tracks like Time and Us and Them appeared in rough form, sometimes with different lyrics or extended solos. The audience's response shaped what stayed and what was cut, as the band paid close attention to moments that landed or fell flat. This nightly feedback loop pushed the group to tighten transitions and sharpen the narrative, turning abstract jams into a unified statement. The interplay on stage was intense but collaborative, with Gilmore and Wright often locking eyes across their instruments, adjusting harmonies and cues on the fly. By the end of the tour, the bones of the album were in place, but the band knew the real work still lay ahead. The stage had taught them what resonated, but the sound they imagined required tools and techniques they could only find at Abbey Road. The journey was about to move from the unpredictability of live performance into the focused, sometimes frustrating world of the studio. Inside Abbey Road's walls, Pink Floyd found themselves up against the limits of the very technology that made their ambitions possible. The studio's Studer A80 tape machines offered just 16 tracks, no more. Every minute of music had to fit inside that boundary, forcing the band and their engineers to make tough choices. When all 16 tracks filled up, Alan Parsons and the team would bounce, mixing several tracks down to one or two, then layering new parts on top. Each bounce risked losing a little clarity, a little magic. As the original recording became a second-generation copy, this routine was not just a technical hurdle. It shaped how songs were arranged and which ideas survived. Effects were not conjured from thin air. If the band wanted the sound of clocks chiming or coins clinking, they had to hunt through EMI's vast sound effects archive or invent what they needed from scratch. For the song Money, the team assembled a loop from real coins and cash registers, splicing tape by hand to lock in the song's odd 7/4 times signature. Every effect, every overdub meant another precious track occupied, another calculation about what could stay and what would be sacrificed. The process demanded discipline and creative problem-solving. Failed experiments like the quadraphonic mix Parsons attempted often came down to these track limitations and the wear of repeated tape copying. The entire workflow became a balancing act. Preserve as much sonic detail as possible while pushing the music into new territory. These constraints did not stifle the band. They forced a kind of sharpness, a collective focus that would define the album's sound. The technical groundwork laid here set the stage for the album's most memorable moments, where every detail had to fight for its place in the mix. Alan Parsons stood over a tangle of tape, razor blade in hand, piecing together the sound that would launch Money into rock history. The loop was not just a clever trick. It was a feat of patience and precision. Coins dropped into a mixing bowl, cash registers clattered, paper tore. Each sound was spliced and measured by eye, then wound around mic stands in the control room to lock in that stubborn 7/4 rhythm. Parsons later described it as a logistical nightmare, but the result was unmistakable. The groove snapped into place, giving the song its swagger and setting a new benchmark for what a rock single could be. In another corner of Abbey Road, Clare Torry arrived for what she thought would be a routine session. Alan Parsons had recruited her for a track that needed something wordless, something raw. David Gilmore gave almost no direction, asking her to sing what she felt. Torry closed her eyes and let loose a cascade of sound, from soft moans to soaring screams. The band watched, stunned, as she finished the take in a single pass. That first improvised performance became the centerpiece of the great gig in the sky. Years later, Torry remembered the moment as pure instinct, unfiltered emotion caught on tape. Meanwhile, the opening of time demanded something different, a sense of chaos and inevitability. Nick Mason and roadie Chris Adamson spent hours recording clocks, alarms, and ticking mechanisms, layering over 30 separate recordings from EMI's sound library. Parsons assembled the montage with the TG12345 console, fading overlapping chimes into a wall of noise that suddenly breaks into silence before the first heartbeat of the song. These moments were not just experiments, they were breakthroughs, each born from the collision of discipline, accident, and wild ambition. The album's soundscape was now unmistakable, and every member, engineer, singer, drummer had left a fingerprint on its DNA. Arguments broke out in the control room as the final mixes took shape. Roger Waters and Nick Mason pushed for a stripped, almost clinical sound, vocals up front, effects sharp and dry, nothing to soften the edges. Across the desk, David Gilmore and Richard Wright argued for space and atmosphere, their vision built on echo and subtle reverb, letting the music breathe. Alan Parsons, caught in the middle, kept meticulous notes as each camp lobbied for their version. The sessions grew tense, with hours spent reworking the same passage, chasing a balance that never seemed to satisfy everyone. In the end, Chris Thomas was brought in for a fresh perspective. His ears, unclouded by weeks of debate, helped steer the band toward a compromise. Vocals that cut through, but with just enough echo to hang in the air. The final mix was less about victory than about finding a way forward, each side giving ground, the album's sound shaped as much by conflict as by consensus. With the deadline looming, the band and engineers gathered for one last marathon session. Chris Thomas took the helm, his ears fresh after weeks of debate had worn everyone down. Alan Parsons set up the control room, tape reels spinning as each song was scrutinized and adjusted. Waters and Mason pressed for a punchy, stripped-down sound, while Gilmore and Wright argued for more air and echo. Every fader move became a negotiation. In the end, the final mix found its balance, vocals cut through, effects shimmered without drowning the core, and each instrument claimed its space. The approved mix was printed to tape within a week, just in time for mastering. The tension that had threatened to derail the project now gave the album its edge. The sound was locked, and the album was ready for the world. Decades later, studio tensions and creative gambles still echo through every note. The album's questions about power, time, and sanity remain as urgent as ever. Each new listener proves its legacy isn't just nostalgia. It's a challenge that endures. What does the dark side mean to you? Share your thoughts below.